Emily Johnson leaves her husband, Richard, after discovering his wealth comes from unethical practices, choosing to raise her children with honesty and integrity despite hardship. Through hard work and strong principles, she earns the community's respect and eventually influences local governance while staying true to her values. Her legacy lives on through her children and the positive impact she had on her community. Before we begin the story, if you are new to our channel, please subscribe right away, like the video, and share it with your friends so this story can reach everyone. If you want your name to be included in our upcoming story, make sure to comment your name and the place you are listening from. In our next story, we will mention your name here. So, let's move ahead with our story. The small two-story house on the outskirts of Cleveland looked ordinary from the outside. Its faded white walls, blue shutters, and the whine of an old wind chime gave no clue to the battles unfolding within. Neighbors saw only the promise of comfort: a man with a stable job in the city, a woman who tended to her children with care, and evenings when the glow of warm yellow light spilled from the kitchen window. But inside, Emily Johnson's heart was restless. Her husband Richard worked at the county office, a mid-level bureaucrat with ties to contractors and developers. Over the years, Emily had watched the house get filled with new furniture, the pantry stocked with expensive foods, and their children, Lucas 7 and Hannah 5, clothed in the finest brands that she never would have dared to buy before marriage. And yet she noticed the subtle signs: the phone calls taken behind closed doors, the envelope of cash in the drawer, the way certain gifts arrived without receipts or explanation. Emily was not naive. She had grown up in hardship, working nights in diners while studying nursing before she left that path to raise a family. She knew what hard-earned money looked like. Hers came with sore feet, sweat-stained uniforms, and exhaustion that filled her bones. Richard's new flow of income was not that kind. It was too smooth, too easy. One October evening, as the breezes rustled through the trees, Richard dropped his leather briefcase onto the dining table. Emily, plating mashed potatoes and roast chicken, heard the familiar thud. She glanced at him, his suit too polished for his modest government pay, his tie flashing with luxury. "Good news," Richard said, sliding an envelope across the table before she could question him. "We're all set for the mortgage next year, paid in advance." Emily froze with the serving spoon in her hand. Her eyes fell on the thick wad of bills inside the envelope. Her first thought returned to her children, who were chasing each other in the living room, their laughter as a contrast to the heaviness that settled in her stomach. "Where did this come from?" she asked quietly. He smiled without meeting her eyes. "Don't worry about it. Just know that I'm taking care of this family." Emily pressed her lips together, her pulse quickening. She knew he was lying. And that evening, when she tucked Lucas and Hannah into bed, the question weighed unbearably on her heart. What kind of future was being purchased with this tainted money? That night, she couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan spun slowly above her, and Richard snored beside her. Emily thought of her father, a steelworker who had often come home with dirt caked into the creases of his hands, but who never cheated a worker or lied for a paycheck. He died with little savings, but a reputation for honesty that his neighbors still spoke of. That was the kind of dignity she wanted her children to inherit, not silk shirts bought with lies. The next morning at breakfast, Richard tried to distract the kids with the promise of a weekend trip. Emily set down her coffee cup, her voice steady yet burning. "This money," she said simply, "it's turning our children's bread into poison." Richard looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" "Don't pretend," Emily said, meeting his gaze. "I see the way it comes. Off the books, under the table. Don't lie to me anymore." Silence settled like a storm cloud. Lucas glanced between them, sensing the tension, though too young to grasp its depth. Richard laughed dismissively. "Emily, you're imagining things. Plenty of men do what I do.
It's just how the system works. Emily's stomach tightened. Then the system is wrong, and I won't let you buy our children's lives with filth. He slammed his fist on the table. Do you want them to starve? Do you want them to wear rags? His voice cracked with anger, but beneath it was fear. Fear she'd expose him, fear she might walk away. Emily's decision had already been carved into her heart. That evening, while Richard was still at work, she packed a small suitcase, clothes for the children, her old nursing books, her mother's cross necklace. She looked at the house one last time. The polished floors, the sofa barely used, and the glittering chandelier Richard had insisted on buying. None of it mattered. She took her children's hands and stepped into the chilly dusk. The night air hit her face like freedom, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She checked into a small motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and worn carpets. The clerk didn't ask questions, and Emily didn't offer answers. With trembling hands, she tucked Lucas and Hannah into one double bed, while she lay awake on the other, listening to the hum of traffic outside. She didn't know yet how she would survive. She didn't know how quickly the world would judge her. All she knew was that she had chosen honor over comfort, even if it cost her everything.
The pay was meager, minimum wage. The shift started at 5 in the morning, which meant waking the children early, bundling them into coats, and dropping them with a neighbor, a single mother who agreed to watch them until daycare opened. Emily's life became a whirlwind of exhaustion. Strong coffee kept her upright through long shifts where she mopped floors, ground coffee beans, and smiled at customers too busy to notice the woman behind the counter. Every dollar she earned was carefully stretched, half for food, a quarter for rent at a cramped studio apartment she found within walking distance of the shop, and the rest tucked aside like fragile seeds of hope. At first, the neighborhood reacted with suspicion. People knew Richard as a man of means, with fine suits and a steady stride. When Emily left him, rumors rushed faster than truth. "She must be crazy," whispered women at the daycare. "She had everything. Why throw it away?" muttered a man at the grocery store. "Bet she'll crawl back once the money runs out," some snickered at the coffee shop. Emily learned to ignore them, though the words cut. Each sneer reminded her of nights she lay awake, wondering if she had done the wrong thing. But then Lucas would bring home a crayon drawing of their family, free of fancy houses, showing just 3 smiling faces. Or Hannah would press her little arms around Emily's neck and say, "Mommy, you work so hard. I love you." Those small words stitched her torn spirit back together. One Saturday morning, Emily brought home bags of groceries. Nothing extravagant, mostly bread, eggs, carrots, and rice. Lucas, sitting at the table, looked up and asked, "Why don't we buy the same snacks Dad used to bring? The cookies, the pizzas, the fancy cereals?" Emily paused, kneeling beside him. She brushed his blonde hair aside and said gently, "Because that money wasn't clean, Lucas. Food bought with wrong money may taste good for a moment, but inside, it hurts us. The food we buy now is honest. It's simple, but it's safe. Do you understand?" Lucas frowned, not fully grasping, but nodded slowly. Hannah, younger and innocent, piped up, "So our bread is happy bread?" Emily smiled through tears. "Yes, sweetheart, it's happy bread." Inevitably, Richard returned. One evening after her shift, Emily found him leaning against the apartment building, his suit sharp, his cologne overbearing. "Emily," he said, voice low but laced with irritation, "enough of this. You've made your point. Come home. The kids need a real house, real food, not this peasant life." Emily carried the grocery bag past him, shoulders squared. "Home stopped being real when you filled it with stolen cash. The children don't need a mansion. They need honesty." His jaw tightened. "And what about respect? People will laugh at them, at us. Do you want them to grow up embarrassed?" Emily unlocked her door and paused.
Respect built on theft is nothing but shame. I'd rather be laughed at for my honesty than pitied for my lies." She closed the door before he could answer. That night, she wept quietly while the children slept, not because she doubted her decision, but because the loneliness pressed heavy. She had walked away from her marriage, from stability, and chosen a brutal uphill climb. The world judged her for it. Richard tempted her with comfort at every corner, yet her resolve hardened like steel. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Emily's hard work began to draw quiet admiration. Customers at the coffee shop noticed her cheerful energy, the way she remembered their orders, the patience with which she trained younger hires. Angela, her manager, offered her more hours, then raised her pay slightly. One morning, the owner of the thrift store next door stopped by for coffee. Seeing Emily expertly juggle tasks, he asked, "You ever thought about managing a place like mine? Takes discipline, honesty, someone people trust. I could use that." The offer startled her. It paid better and came with health benefits. She accepted humbly, and though it meant leaving the coffee shop she had grown attached to, she knew it was a step forward. Soon her routine shifted from pouring lattes to managing inventory, handling registers, and interacting with customers who came searching for used coats, worn books, and secondhand furniture. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and Emily found quiet pride in helping families like hers find affordable necessities. The same neighbors who once whispered began to see differently. When people ran into Emily, they saw a woman tired but radiant with integrity. They noticed how her children spoke politely, how they were modest yet cheerful. Even teachers at Lucas and Hannah's school began to remark, "They have such good manners, Miss Johnson. You're raising them well." The laughter that once followed her was replaced by something new, hesitant respect. Even Richard could sense the shift. His wealth, though larger, no longer attracted admiration. Rumors of corruption swam around him, and contracts tied to his name began to unravel. Meanwhile, Emily stood taller each day, her back straightened, not by arrogance, but by the strength of having nothing to hide. One winter evening, the local church held a small gathering to honor community members who had shown exceptional courage and service. Emily was stunned when her name was called to the stage. The pastor spoke. In a world where it is easier to look away, Emily Johnson chose the harder path, the honest path. She left behind false comfort and built her life with sweat and integrity. Tonight we honor not just her, but the example she sets for us all. Applause filled the room, genuine and warm. For the first time in months, Emily felt the weight on her heart lift. Lucas and Hannah clapped with wide smiles, their eyes bright with pride. From the back of the hall, Richard watched, his expression unreadable. For once, he was not the man people admired. The spotlight belonged to his wife, the woman he had underestimated, the woman who showed that true strength was not found in power or wealth, but in courage. Emily accepted the award quietly, tears brimming in her eyes. She thought of her father, of his calloused hands and unshakable honesty, and whispered within her heart, "I did not let you down." That night, as she tucked her children into bed in their small apartment, Lucas looked up and asked, "Mom, are we poor?" Emily kissed his forehead. "No, sweetheart, we're rich in the ways that matter most." And for the first time in a long time, she slept deeply, with peace cradling her heart. The bitter Cleveland winter struck hard that year. Snow piled on sidewalks, freezing winds whipped through narrow streets, and the heating bill loomed like a beast Emily struggled to tame. Despite her job at the thrift store, each month was still a delicate balancing act. Emily often returned home with her fingers stiff from the cold, her face numb, but her spirit burning with the need to endure. Living on the edge meant every breakdown, a leaky faucet, a doctor's bill, a torn winter coat, felt like a crisis. Yet she found herself growing strangely stronger with each hurdle, unbending in a way she never had been while cushioned by Richard's tainted wealth. One evening, as she closed the thrift store, she noticed Richard's black sedan waiting under a flickering street lamp. She sighed, pulling her scarf tighter. He rolled down the window, warm air and the faint scent of leather seats rushing out. "Get in," he said. "I'm walking," Emily replied. "Emily, for God's sake, stop punishing yourself. There's no honor in freezing to death. Think about the kids. We could give them comfort again. I'll put them in private school, buy them everything they dream of. Do you really want to see Lucas walking to school with holes in his shoes?"
Emily stood still, snowflakes clinging to her coat. For a brief second, his words pierced her like sharp needles. She remembered Lucas shivering some mornings, Hannah craving toys Emily couldn't afford. But then she thought of the poison in every dollar Richard brought. "I'd rather see their shoes worn from honest miles," she said softly, "than see their souls wear thin from your kind of wealth." Richard slammed the car into gear and drove off, tires hissing on the snow. Emily let out a shaky breath. The temptation to collapse back into ease hovered around her often, but resistance had become her armor, and she would not take it off. It wasn't only Emily who bore the sting of sacrifice. Her children did too. At school, Lucas was teased by classmates whose parents knew about Richard's money. One boy sneered, "Why is your mom working like a janitor when your dad's rich? Didn't he want you?" Lucas came home with wet eyes and refused to talk at first, but Emily coaxed it out of him, sitting with him at the small wooden table where their dinner of tomato soup and bread sat cooling. She pressed his hand gently. "Listen to me, Lucas. People will always see money as the measure of worth, but real worth, true worth, comes from who you are when no one's looking, from how you earn what little or much you have. You are not less than anyone else because you live with honesty. Do you hear me?" Lucas sniffled but nodded. Something in his mother's eyes, steady, glowing with conviction, gave him the courage to believe. Months later, Emily's work at the thrift store brought her recognition once more. She had introduced new systems for managing donations, cutting waste, and running small community events where needy families could pick up clothes for free. Her efforts caught the attention of a local journalist who was writing about ordinary heroes in Cleveland. When the article was published, Emily was startled to find her own face staring back from the newspaper, hair pulled back, hands sorting boxes of donated coats. The headline read, "Mother raises kids with honor after leaving corruption behind." Emily almost cried reading it. She had not wanted fame, but the truth of her choice was finally reaching hearts. Strangers began to greet her with unexpected warmth. At church, people who once muttered now shook her hand firmly. Even some of Lucas's classmates shifted their tone, repeating what their parents had read in the article. Respect was no longer a distant hope. It was sprouting quietly around her. Meanwhile, the walls around Richard began to crack. Investigations into the county office revealed illegal dealings, mismanaged contracts, kickbacks. His name appeared in headlines, not for respect, but for scandal. Emily read them with sorrow, not satisfaction. Whatever he had done, Richard was still the father of her children. One Saturday morning, as she sorted laundry, there was a heavy knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find Richard, but not the polished man she once knew. His tie hung loosely, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "They're tearing me apart, Emily," he said, collapsing into a chair without waiting for permission. "Indictments, lawsuits, friends are disappearing. People I thought I controlled are turning their backs. And you..." His voice caught with bitterness. "You are the one they respect now. Well, Emily set down the laundry basket and sighed. "Richard, respect isn't built on fear. It's earned in the quiet moments, like how you treat your neighbors, how you raise your children, how you make your living. You tried to buy it, but you can't. You never could." For once, Richard had no retort. He buried his head in his hands. As the months stretched on, Emily was offered another step forward, A local nonprofit, impressed by her work at the thrift store, asked if she would consider directing a larger outreach program for families in need. The pay was steady, the purpose aligned with her heart, and most importantly, it gave her the chance to touch other lives walking the same path she had once walked, lonely, judged, but determined to survive. When she accepted the position, her children celebrated with her in their tiny apartment. Lucas brought her a crayon-written card, "To the bravest mom in the world." Hannah gave her a string of paper hearts. Emily's chest swelled with pride, not the kind born of money or social recognition, but the deep, lasting pride of integrity. That night, as snowflakes drifted against the window, she whispered a prayer of thanks, not for riches, but for the strength to keep walking, for the laughter of her children, for the certainty that even against the hardest winters, their home was filled with a warmth money could never buy. And though the road ahead would still twist and steepen, Emily now walked it with her head high, knowing she carried something inside her that could never be bought or stolen. Spring brought restless winds to Cleveland, but for Emily Johnson, it carried something else: opportunity. Her new position at the local nonprofit, Hands of Hope, demanded more of her than ever before. She was now directing a team, coordinating food drives, managing funds to support families who had lost homes, jobs, or stability. Emily had never imagined herself in such a role. She was that woman behind a coffee counter once, mopping floors at dawn, yet here she stood, wearing simple blouses and practical shoes, leading meetings where others looked to her for guidance. The irony was not lost on her. Once dismissed, laughed at, whispered about, she was now sought out for her strength and clarity. But power, real power, even in small doses, was a dangerous gift. One afternoon, as Emily was reviewing financial papers in the office, a man named David Walters visited. He was a wealthy donor known across the city, an industrialist whose name was etched into the plaques of hospitals and schools. His smile was warm on the surface, but his eyes calculated. "Mrs. Johnson." He shook her hand firmly. "I've heard about the tremendous work you've been doing here. Truly inspiring. I think we can help each other." Emily gestured for him to sit. "I'm listening." David slid a sleek folder across her desk. Inside were documents outlining a proposed partnership, an infusion of funds so large it could double the nonprofit's capacity. But there was something attached, unspoken at first, then carefully phrased. "In return," David said casually, "all I ask is that certain suppliers I recommend are used for your projects. They're friends of mine, good men. It's just business." Emily's stomach tightened. She had heard the phrase before. It's Richard's phrase. It's just how the system works. She closed the folder gently. "Mr. Walters, generosity without strings is charity, but generosity with demands is business. And this place isn't for business. It's for families." David's smile thinned. "You realize you're turning down millions of dollars that could feed children, give beds to the homeless? Do you want their needs on your conscience?" Emily leaned forward, voice steady but firm. "What poisons children isn't the lack of gold-plated donations. It's learning that we sold our values for comfort. They need bread, yes, but they need it to be clean bread. I will not trade integrity for appearances. Not here, not ever." David studied her for a long moment, then scoffed. "You sound brave now, but one day you'll realize the world doesn't run on righteousness." He stood, snatching back the folder, and left with the slam of the door. Alone, Emily slumped in her chair, trembling from the exchange. Temptation had returned in another face, cloaked in the language of opportunity. She whispered to herself, "I chose this path once. I will choose it again, no matter the cost." The incident didn't stay hidden. Word quietly spread among staff and families about how Emily had rejected Walter's deal. Some admired her courage, others thought her foolish for turning away funds so desperately needed. But little by little, the admiration grew stronger than the criticism. Mothers at the center whispered, "She really means what she says. She'd rather keep us small but clean." Volunteers said, "If I'm working for her, I know this place won't be corrupted." Even local journalists picked up the story, writing editorials about a woman who refuses to bend. Emily didn't bask in the attention, but she knew in her heart that this was exactly what her children needed to see, a consistency in her actions that matched her words. Meanwhile, Richard's world spiraled further downward. The news was filled with his name now, no longer tied to authority, but to charges and corruption trials. He eventually lost his position at the county office, and one evening, while Emily was returning from a community meeting, she saw him again on the street. This time, he was thinner, exhausted, his eyes empty. No expensive car, no fine suit. Just a man stripped of illusions. He approached quietly, not with arrogance, but with brokenness. He said, "Emily, you were right. They've destroyed me. I thought I could own respect, but I only rented it, and the rent came due." Emily stood in silence. A piece of her ached for him, but another part remembered the children, the poison money, the dignity she had fought for like oxygen. She said gently, "You can't change what's behind you, Richard, but you can decide how you walk forward. The children will need you, not your money, not your suits, but the man you could still become. If you want healing, start there." He dropped his gaze, nodding slowly. Whether he would change or not, she left in God's hands. By summer, Emily's face had become known beyond Cleveland. Universities asked her to speak about integrity in public service. Community groups invited her to share her journey. She never lectured with grandstanding words. Instead, she told her story plainly. The woman who left a comfortable house because the floor beneath her was rotten. The mother who worked humble jobs. The worker who chose honesty over shortcuts. Her audience always fell silent, many wiping tears, because in her story they saw their own crossroads, their own hidden battles. Lucas and Hannah sometimes sat in the front rows watching their mother. Their eyes shone with pride, not for fame or applause, but because they knew how much it cost her to live this way. One autumn evening, the city council approached Emily. A seat had opened suddenly, and citizens were calling for her appointment. The same city office where Richard once wielded corrupt influence now beckoned to her with the chance to make honest change. When the offer came, Emily's heart pounded. She paced her small apartment that night, staring out at the city lights. Could she do it? Could she enter the very halls that had ensnared her husband and so many others? Lucas, now older, came quietly beside her. "Mom," he said, "if you take that job, you won't become like Dad, right?" Emily turned to him, her hands trembling, and pulled him close. "No, Lucas, I won't. Because I already walked away once, and I know now I'd rather carry a small light than a corrupt flame." The next morning, she accepted. Her work in the council was grueling, filled with battles against those who still clung to old corrupt systems, but she fought with calm persistence. She proposed reforms for transparency, pushed policies that favored working families, and rejected every shadowy deal that came her way. There were setbacks, of course. She was mocked at times as an idealist, but slowly her consistency won her allies. People began saying, "If Emily Johnson signed it, you know it's honest." Her reputation became her shield, her strongest weapon against compromise. And little by little, Cleveland began to shift, not because Emily was extraordinary, but because she was ordinary and refused to surrender to what was normal. Her children thrived, not in wealth, but in resilience, courage, and love. And those scars of struggle never left Emily entirely. She wore them like medals. Years later, when Lucas graduated high school and Hannah won a scholarship to college, they stood with their mother in the same small apartment where they had once eaten tomato soup in chipped bowls. "Mom," Lucas said with quiet reverence, "you gave us more than Dad ever could. You gave us a story to be proud of." Emily looked at her children, tall and strong now, and smiled with tears streaming down her face. "I gave you what my father gave me, a name that isn't tainted, a life you can carry with your head high." And as autumn leaves swirled outside, Emily Johnson, the wife who once walked into the night with nothing but 2 children and conviction, had become something more than a survivor. She was a beacon in her city, proof that honesty, however fragile, could endure in the storm. Proof that the courage of a wife could remake not just her home, but her world. The years rolled gently forward, like waves smoothing sharp stones. Life never became entirely easy for Emily Johnson, but it became deeply meaningful. Her days at the council, her evenings at community events, her quiet nights working late at her kitchen table, all of them built into a foundation that her children would one day stand upon. Emily never measured her life by wealth. Instead, she measured it by the people she could serve. And slowly, she began to realize something extraordinary. What had once been the lonely choice of a wife in a small conflict had grown into a lesson her whole city was now beginning to learn. Hannah, once the little girl who called their meals happy bread, grew into a fierce, determined young woman. She excelled in school not because she sought prestige, but because she inherited her mother's discipline. When she won a scholarship to study social work, Emily's heart overflowed. "I want to help kids, Mom, like you helped us. There are kids everywhere whose parents make mistakes, and those kids get dragged into it. They need someone to tell them it doesn't have to ruin their lives." Emily pressed her daughter's hand, pride softening her tired eyes. "You will be their voice, Hannah. Just don't forget, it isn't grand speeches that change lives. It's small, honest acts." Lucas, meanwhile, carried his own burdens. Where Hannah thrived in school, Lucas wrestled with anger at his father's legacy. At 16, he once got into a fight with a classmate who insulted Emily, calling her the woman who shamed her family in the news. When the school called, Emily sat with Lucas at their kitchen table. His knuckles were bruised, his eyes filled with both guilt and fire. "I couldn't let him talk about you that way, Mom," he muttered. I sighed, brushing his hand. "Lucas, defending honor doesn't mean throwing punches. Integrity never needs fists. It stands tall on its own. If you fight every person who mocks us, you'll waste your strength. Save it for building the life you want, not breaking others down." Slowly, Lucas learned. He developed a love of carpentry, working weekends to build furniture. He would later tell Emily, "Every board I sand feels like piecing together something honest, something no one can take away." Emily's name continued to carry weight. Churches, town halls, and even universities often asked her to tell her story. She always responded humbly, "I am no saint, I am no martyr. I am a woman who chose the harder path, and if I can do it, so can you. Remember, children, watch. If we feed them lies at our tables, they will grow to hunger for dishonesty. But if we feed them integrity, they will carry it into the world long after we're gone." Parents nodded, students wept, and ordinary families found courage in her words. As for Richard, his life continued to unravel. He was eventually convicted on multiple charges, serving time behind bars. When he was released, years later, he lived quietly, far from the spotlight. He tried on occasion to reconnect with his children. Hannah forgave him quicker,
offering small gestures of reconciliation. Lucas, however, struggled longer, unable to forget the shame. Emily never poisoned their minds against their father, but she reminded them gently. Bitterness is a chain, and forgiveness is the key. Even if he failed us, we must not fail ourselves by carrying hatred forever. In her own heart, Emily shed bitterness, but not regret. Walking away had saved her family's soul, even if it had broken their household. Years into her service, Emily pushed hard for a reform program that demanded more transparency in local government. It faced heavy opposition: corporations, lobbyists, even fellow council members who feared losing their power. The battle dragged for months. On the final night of the vote, Emily stood before the council chamber, her voice calm but burning. "I am simply a wife who once walked away from poisoned bread, and I am here because my children deserve better, because your children deserve better. Every dollar that bleeds out of this system dishonestly is a dollar stolen from their future. If you will not vote for me, vote for them. If you will not vote for justice, then at least vote for the children who have no voice in this chamber." The room fell silent, and when the votes were cast, the reform passed, by a single vote, but enough to change the city's future. Emily walked home that night through the cool air, head high, knowing that even if no one else remembered her words, her children had. Years later, when Hannah became a social worker and Lucas opened his own carpentry business, they carried Emily's story with them. At community gatherings, people whispered, "That's Emily Johnson's daughter. That's her son. Honesty runs in their blood." Emily grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her hands marked with the lines of labor and time. But inside, she carried a steady fire. Not the fire of rebellion now, but the steady glow of a life lived true. One summer afternoon, the city announced an award for civic virtue, and to her surprise, it was named after her, the Emily Johnson Award for Integrity and Service. As she stood on stage, frail but radiant, she looked out at the crowd: officials, parents, children, students. Among them, Lucas and Hannah stood tall, their eyes shining with pride. She didn't give a long speech. She simply said, "I was a wife who made one hard choice, but that choice grew into a story larger than I ever imagined. If you take anything from me, take this. Wealth fades, power shifts, but honesty lasts longer than we do. Leave your children a name they will never be ashamed to carry." Tears flowed freely that day. When Emily finally left public service, she retreated to a quieter life. She moved into a small home near a community garden where she spent mornings tending flowers and evenings reading. Still, people visited her, seeking counsel. Young mothers, struggling workers, students tempted by shortcuts. She listened, advised, and reminded them, the harder path is worth it.
Her greatest joy was watching her grandchildren grow, knowing the lessons had not stopped with her children. One evening, as the sun set in amber hues, Hannah's little girl climbed into Emily's lap and asked, "Grandma, why do people say you're brave?" Emily smiled, brushing a curl from the child's forehead. "Because," she said softly, "I chose truth when lies were easier, and you, my darling, must always be brave enough to do the same." When Emily Johnson's name eventually appeared in her obituary, the headlines did not speak of titles or offices. They spoke of courage, of integrity, of a mother who taught her family and then her city that dignity was worth more than all the riches in the world. And though her body rested beneath the Cleveland earth, her name lived on, not only in awards and articles, but in the daily choices of ordinary people who remembered the woman who once walked away from poisoned bread. Her courage had become more than survival. It had become a legacy. The seasons of Emily Johnson's life drew toward their final chapters as softly as snow melts into spring. She was no longer the young mother standing terrified outside a motel with nothing but 2 suitcases and conviction. She was no longer the woman scrubbing counters at dawn or defending truth against powerful men. She was something quieter now, but stronger still, a living example. Her name had traveled farther than she ever intended. Newspapers across the Midwest cited her when speaking of civic reforms. Local universities quoted her insistence on clean bread, not poisoned wealth. And across Cleveland, people often remarked, "She's the woman who proved that honesty can feed a home." But Emily herself never sought grandeur. She measured her worth in far humbler ways. The sound of her grandchildren's laughter, the sight of Hannah guiding vulnerable families out of despair, the pride of Lucas sanding the edge of handmade chairs with the same patience Emily once carried in her voice. Most mornings, Emily sat by her small community garden. She kept a bench there, beneath a tree whose roots had cracked the earth with time. She liked to watch people come and go, mothers tugging toddlers along, teenagers with restless eyes, old men sharing chess matches on worn boards. Occasionally, someone would stop and sit beside her, not to praise, but to seek. One afternoon, a young woman named Claire approached, her eyes rimmed with tears. "Mrs. Johnson, I don't know what to do. My husband, he has money, but I know it isn't clean, and I think—" She broke off, wringing her hands. "I think I'm too afraid to leave." Emily's chest tightened. The memories rushed back, the padded chairs, the envelope of cash, the night she walked into uncertainty with 2 children trailing behind. She saw herself in this younger woman, trembling on the edge of a decision that would define her life. Taking Claire's hand gently, Emily said, "Courage doesn't mean you stop being afraid. It means you choose to walk anyway, with your fear, toward what you know is right. Leaving will feel like losing everything, but staying, with poison on your table, you will lose more. You will lose yourself. If I could walk through the cold night once, so can you." Claire wept, but in her eyes there flickered embers of strength. That day, as Emily watched her go, she understood something deeper. Her story was not only her own, it was a lantern passed forward, lighting the path for others facing their own shadows. One winter, Emily received an unexpected visitor, Richard. He arrived looking older, his hair gone gray, his face lined. His movements lacked the swift arrogance he once embodied. Instead, he walked as though carrying weights no one else could see.
"Emily," he said, quietly, when she opened the door, "I had to see you. Not to ask forgiveness. You've already given me more than I deserved. But to tell you, I was wrong every step of the way. I wanted power, respect, wealth, and I had it, but it left me hollow. You—" His voice broke. "You walked away and ended up with something I never understood until now. Peace." Emily studied him for a long moment. She no longer felt anger toward him, only sorrow. "Richard," she said firmly, "life offered us both choices. I took one road, you took another. You can't change the past, but you're not dead yet. Make this day different from the last. That's the only way forward." He nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. For the first time in decades, the man she once loved looked human again. They spoke for a while, not as husband and wife, but as 2 people who had walked very different valleys and finally reached the truth. Respect could never be bought. When he left, Emily knew it might be the last time she saw him, but she also knew some sliver of healing had entered his life. As the years deepened, Hannah often brought her children to spend weekends with their grandmother. Emily would sit them at the table, break bread with them, and laugh at their chatter. Sometimes she told them stories of their mother and uncle when they were young. Other times she told little fables she invented on the spot. But always she ended with the same refrain. "Remember, No matter how tempting the easy path looks, choose the right one. It may look longer, harder, poorer, but in the end, it is the richest of all. Lucas, too, would bring works of carpentry he had completed, strong tables, polished cabinets, intricate chairs, and show them proudly to his mother. "It's all hands and patience, Mom, not tricks, the same way you raised us." Emily would run her fingers over the smooth wood, tears welling in her eyes, and whisper, "This is wealth. This honesty you build with your own two hands." When the city dedicated a mural in her honor, painted across a community center wall where children played, Emily attended quietly. The mural showed a woman holding two children's hands, walking forward into a bright horizon, behind her the shadows of temptation falling away. Reporters asked how it felt. Emily smiled gently and said, "No award, no mural, no words mean more than seeing a child smile because of a meal honestly given. That's what this all was about. Not me. Them." The cameras flashed, but Emily slipped away quickly after. Fame had never been her language. She spoke only in deeds. In her final years, Emily's strength waned. She fell ill, unable to walk long distances, confined to her small home surrounded by notes, books, and the laughter of her visiting grandchildren. One evening, as the family gathered around her bed, Hannah asked softly, "Mom, if you could leave us just one message, the simplest, what would it be?" Her breath was shallow, but her eyes clear as glass. "Live clean," she whispered. "Even if the world laughs, even if it costs you everything, live clean. Because one day, when the noise fades, your children will look at your name, and they must never be ashamed to carry it." Her children wept softly as she closed her eyes, peace radiating from her, even at the edge of life. When Emily Johnson passed, the city gathered in mourning, but also in celebration. Not for a politician or a celebrity, but for a mother whose courage had rippled outward to remake a community. At her funeral, simple words were etched onto her headstone. "She chose truth over comfort, and left us the courage to do the same." Generations to come would point to her story. Teachers would tell their students. Mothers in quiet kitchens would whisper about her when faced with their own hard choices. And somewhere in the lives she touched, 1,000 small acts of honesty would bloom like wildflowers, unseen perhaps, but unstoppable. Because of her courage, the poisoned bread lost its power. Because of her courage, a family, a city, and perhaps even strangers far beyond found their own strength. And so, Emily's legacy did not end in death. It lived in every honest hand, in every step toward truth, in every child raised on clean bread rather than poisoned lies. The courage of a wife had become the courage of a people.